Hey everyone, you are listening to the Divergent Conversations podcast. We are two neurodivergent mental health professionals in a neurotypical world. I'm Patrick Casale.
And I'm Dr. Neff.
And during these episodes, we do talk about sensitive subjects, mental health, and there are some conversations that can certainly feel a bit overwhelming. So we do just want to use that disclosure and disclaimer before jumping in. And thanks for listening. Hey everyone, so welcome back to Divergent Conversations. Today, Megan and I are going to talk about the ADHD tax, what that means, how it impacts, some strategies, and different ways to navigate as we continue to wrap up this ADHD collection that we've been doing. And last week, we talked about interest-based nervous systems. If you have questions or comments about any of this stuff, always send it to our Gmail account or message us on Instagram, and we won't respond most likely. So I have gotten so much better, Megan, and I want to thank you for this.
I'm so proud of you.
I hate this for some of you who are listening because you're probably like, I messaged and I see that you looked at it, but you didn't respond. And that's my newfound boundary with a lot of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it reaches a threshold where it's just literally impossible to respond unless it was your full-time job. And then it
100%.
forces you to, like, the completionist is like screaming, but you're like, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. That's it in a nutshell. Which is a good segue into what we're going to talk about today. And I think like the ADHD tax is something that we don't talk about enough. And I know for myself that I experience it quite often. And, last week we talked about interest-based nervous systems and pursuing things that are exciting or stimulating or the novelty component. And I know for myself that means a lot of overcommitment to things that I don't actually have the energy or capacity for. And I end up paying a massive price. And that can even be a financial price. Like there have been so many moments and instances in life where I've gotten so excited about an opportunity, a vacation, a trip, a plan. I jump in head first. I book the Airbnb, I book the flight, I book the hotel that's non-refundable without looking at the details. All of a sudden I can no longer go for whatever reason because maybe the small details fell through the cracks and I missed something. Maybe I booked the wrong dates. Maybe I booked the wrong times. All of a sudden there's a massive shame component and it spirals.
Yep. I can relate. It's interesting. I typically think of the ADHD task, like the first thing that pops in my mind is money. But I also feel like, and I know you were talking about money there, but you're also talking about other things like time. And that would be interesting to think through the ADHD tax, not just money, but like time, sleep, relationships. Like it's a big tax. It's a big tax.
And if you are also an autistic ADHDer like Megan and myself, there's a big tax emotionally and physiologically to the system.
Mhm.
I know you and I have talked a lot on here about overcommitting to things that we're excited about in the moment and how our autistic parts are kind of screaming internally, like waving the white flag, like I give up. I can't do much more of this. And I know for myself when I've committed to anything, by the time I get to that commitment, that meeting, that appointment, that collaboration, that event, I'm like, why in the world would I have said yes to this? And that can be so internally conflicting when it feels like your system is just like, why would you do this to me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it creates a lot of internal conflict as well, for sure. Yeah.
I know, like I just got back from all these retreats and all this travel. And last year, I think it felt like the smart decision to go to 6 different countries in 6 months and host 4 events and wedge us a keynote in between. And I mean, saying that out loud now sounds ludicrous, but last year it felt really exciting. I romanticized the hell out of it and pay the price of like all of this impulsivity, all of this excitement, all of this romanticizing that leads to this inevitable burnout, crash,
Mhm.
depletion experience that's going to take me months to recover from.
I really appreciate that idea of like the romanticizing that happens, which like post-it note, we should do an episode on like the romantification of
Writing it
future
down.
self that happens in ADHD. I think both autism and ADHD, but that feels really ADHD, like my future self who's going to be on top of all these things. Um, cause yeah, it's so easy to say yes to a romantificated, I think that's not actually a word.
I
Like
like it though.
thing of a future self. Like, so I'll share this. I feel free to scratch if you're not comfortable. But since we did talk about it in the like January intentions episode, you and I have been going back and forth and like, do we want to create a community for neurodivergent entrepreneurs? And I've personally had a lot of internal struggle around that because the romantified version of that in my head is so fun and so creative and so playful. And I had to do like we recently we're like, no, we're not going to do that. I was mostly like, I don't think that makes sense right now. Um, I had to get out of the romantified version, be like, okay, day to day, this is what it's going to look like. These will be the tasks added to my list. Do I have capacity for that? What is it actually going to feel like? And once I could do that, I could see a little bit more clearly, but it was really hard to release the romantified version I had in my head.
One, I want to find out if romantified or romantification is a word because we're going
I
to
think
use
we
it a
should
lot.
make it a word if it's not.
Yeah. I was going to say, it feels like it's going to come up a lot in this episode. Two, I really appreciate that you just brought that up because I know you and I have talked about this offline about like collaboration, partnership, creating this thing together. And at times it did feel like, wow, this would be such an exciting thing to do. And I think the more, so that's an interesting thing to circle back to last week's episode on interest based nervous systems about like, we were talking about like, how do we pump the brakes sometimes off the car once it gets moving? Because I think we want to pursue the things that we romanticize. I think we want to pursue the things that feel really like novelty and excitement in the moment to create that energy flow state creativity process that we've talked about so often on here to feel more connected. But then in reality, you have to almost stop and say, like, does my neurology support this? Does my system and my capacity support this decision? So challenging in the moment though. Like to take a step back and to sit here now in June, right? With that episode we did in like December or whenever it was. I mean, I don't think either of us are in the place where that feels like it's a good decision for where we want to go or what we want to create. But in the moment, it felt really good. And then maybe my energy sparks your energy or vice versa. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh my God, let's like you're off to the races. And I think about how many times in life where that's been a thing for me. And very shortly after, maybe it's an hour, maybe it's a week, maybe it's a day, maybe it's a month. It's quickly like, you realize this is not the right decision for me for whatever reason. But I know in the past, when you commit that much energy or intention to something, and then you realize it's not a good decision, that can feel really internally conflicting too, and kind of
Mhm.
confusing. Of like, but why did that feel so good at the time?
Why was I so excited about it and now not? And then I think adding in a relationship component complicates it further. Like I'm trying to do better at caveating this, especially when I enter friendship or any kind of collaboration with people of like, hey, I'm someone who throws a lot of ideas out there. It's never an expectation. It's never, a lot of them don't stick. Because one thing I'm realizing, and I'm working really hard to get better about this, is if I'm really engaged in a conversation and excited, I'll impulsively be like, we should write an article on this. We should do a course together. We should do like we should write a book together. Like I've said that to a lot of people. And I and I realize, especially now as my platform has grown, like when I say that, if I'm not willing to follow through with that, like I need, those are words I need to be more cautious with. And so I'm trying to get better about that. But that is because I will ideate with people and then feel like I've committed to someone in that ideation. And that feels really like I've felt really bad because I think you're more in the entrepreneur space than I am. So I think you had a bit more energy around that. And like, it's like, I feel like I don't know if you felt that, but I was like, I feel like I'm letting Patrick down. And that felt really shitty.
I never felt, and I appreciate you saying that, and this is kind of cool to process as we're talking about all this stuff, but I never felt that way. But I can understand what you're saying because I know what it's like when I get excited about something, how I can be quite persuasive if I'm excited about something. I can sell a lot of stuff to people if I'm like, this is a good idea. And if someone comes on board to that idea, and then it's like, ooh, where can this go? Like I'm excited to see where the journey takes us. And I think that is a really unique skill set to try to refine about how do I step back from this, because I know so often we're leading with sometimes impulsivity, excitement, dopamine seeking, stimulation, whatever it is, the desire for connectedness. And ultimately, it's just not what our systems need. And I think a lot of ADHDers really struggle with the whole concept of like, I have all these ideas, I wrote them all down, I'm going to pursue them. But then you commit some energy, some time, it's not the right moment in your life, and you cross it off the list, that can feel kind of shitty. And
Mhm.
almost like the whole narrative of like, see, I never follow through, or like I can never finish things or complete things, or everything's like half done. And I'm trying to get better at being like, maybe it's just not the right chapter or the right season of life for this idea right now, but that doesn't mean it has to be completely removed from the playing field for eternity. And I think I have tried really hard to get better about that mentality too.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. One thing when you were talking about like how many ideas we have, that came to mind, like I think that makes it feel like we're doing less than we even are, because it's like in our mind, it's like, well, there's a like 100 trails I want to go down.
Yeah.
So even if we go down two of them, we're still seeing the 98 we didn't go down. And so I think that also creates a sort of like perception bias of doing less, because our mind is like, well, I want to do this, 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 and this. Um, and we're like, yeah, no, that we can't do all that. One book I read this spring that has I'm like slowly letting it shape my planning. It's slow productivity, and it's a lot about like, okay, limiting. You talk about how many projects you have, and because what people often don't realize is the overhead of everything you say yes to. That's what really sucks
Yeah.
time. And so limiting like your yeses, not because of the project itself, but the overhead of maintaining it. And then like actually defining what those are. So maybe it's 4, maybe it's 5. But that has really been reshaping my approach to like my business, my life, of taking that step back and be like, am I thinking about the maintenance and the overhead of starting another thing? And
Right.
that's hard for us because we like to be starting new things.
It is hard. So I think you almost have to also give yourself permission to have this like gray area or this bucket over here that's like, this is where new ideas are allowed to like be birthed and to just exist. Because I know for myself, if I say like, no more new ideas, no more new projects for like X amount of time, feels really constricting, like the walls are closing in. And I really struggle with like feeling unbelievably anxious in those situations. So I've tried really hard to do what you're saying, to be intentional about my yeses, to set better boundaries in regards to my time, my energy, my capacity, while also allowing for a little bit of like that dreaming, romantification, uh, creativity process to just continuously cultivate. Because I never know when an idea from over here becomes front and center and then the priority, because that can shift so quickly for me. I think most of my best creative ventures have come from situations that I didn't really expect to happen. And, but anyway, I don't want to get off track too much, but I'm thinking about like an example right now is a friend of mine hosts a lot of summits for group practice owners. And she reached out to, I'm speaking at one this week, which I don't know why I committed to it aside from the fact that it's in my hometown. But she said, hey, next year, do you want to come to one in Austin, Texas at the end of March? And I was thinking, I was like, I think at first I was about to say yes. And I was like, wait, you're going to Ireland to host your retreat in March. There's no way you're getting on a plane 2 weeks after that and doing this thing. And I said that. And she came back with like, what if we push it back 2 weeks into April so that you have more time to rest? And again, I was like, almost said yes and impulsively. And I was like, you know what? I've committed to only doing speaking engagements and retreats and events in odd numbered months next year. And I'm going to do as much as I possibly can to honor this, because otherwise that ADHD tax is so significant that it is almost debilitating for the rest of the year. And I just don't want to consistently play catch up anymore. I just don't think I can constantly try to play catch up with the energy reserves that I actually don't have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That almost, the way you're describing it almost sounds more like the autistic tax, but like energy. I
Mhm.
mean, not that these things can be fully separated, but the like energy expenditure, socializing and travel and
Yeah, that's fair.
Mhm.
That's very true.
That'd
Yep.
be interesting. I don't really hear people talk about the autistic tax. That'd be an interesting um, thing to differentiate. Again, these things would intertangle. When I think about, yeah, I actually feel like we haven't really talked about the classic ADHD tax. Maybe we can pivot here. When I think about ADHD tax, I think about things like, like tons of financial stuff. So like starting a subscription and then forgetting about it and forgetting to unsubscribe, or like starting a 2-week free trial on an app and then forgetting about it, forgetting to unsubscribe. What's the word? Spontaneous shopping. That's not the word. There's a word around it. Shopping, impulse shopping. Um, and that, I know that can be like really hard for a lot of us, again, because like it's like, oh, I see that gives me instant dopamine, I'm going to buy it. I don't
Yep.
think through like, does that fit in my budget? So a lot of impulse purchases. For me, like I've moved a few times in the last few years, and it's like the echolalia phrase in my head as I was moving is like, my cabinets are filled with good intentions. Like I threw away so many expensive vitamins, food, and like I do this thing where I'm like, I'm really into a food, and it might be like, I'm really into baking sourdough bread. I'm going to go buy 50 pounds of sourdough flour, or like, I'm going to go buy 50 versions of this. Like, I'm trying to like low carb thing to see if that helps with like inflammation. And then buy a ton of it and then it expires. And so those kind of classic like financial ADHD taxes, or like losing AirPods. um, I I feel like I would not want to add it up throughout my life.
No, no, definitely not. I think so much about like, for me, a lot of it comes from like travel related expenses. And it is literally like jumping into booking hotels, cars, flights, whatevers that cannot be amended, tours, experiences, excursions, and then not looking at the fine print, not looking at the details of like, oh, there's no cancellation policy. This is not refundable. Oh, you actually can't go on those dates because of whatever. Oh, you overlooked this thing in your calendar because you were so excited about this thing and you completely forgot your friend's coming to town to visit. No, you can't go across the country at this time. And then there's so much shamefulness of like, how did I overlook that? How did I not see the fine print? How did I not realize I couldn't get a refund? Like, and then you eat the cost, and the financial cost is huge. And this just happened with me booking a flight in Greece. I booked a flight that I thought was at 4 p.m., give me plenty of time to get to where I was going. I booked 4 a.m. because I overlooked the fact that like,
Mm,
oh, we're not using the same time
mhm.
system in Europe. And I'm like, now I can't get a refund for this. Like that's several $100s that just go out the window. Stuff like that happens all the time.
For sure. Yeah. And that's where that like inattentiveness, which we talked about in our diagnostic series, like especially with fine print, I think that gets a lot of us. I would say inattentiveness and impulsivity, these two traits like stack up a lot of costs in the ADHD tax.
And it's interesting because I don't think of myself as someone who struggles with inattentiveness very often until it's something that it's almost like there's these blinders when the impulsivity comes over me, and I can no longer think clearly about my decision making. And then ultimately you come out of it. It's almost like this fugue state or fog. And I'm like, what did I just do? What did I just commit to? How did that just happen?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. For me, like fine print, I get really inattentive and restless, and I'll just be like, I'll s- I'll skip when I shouldn't, and that's my impatience, and so I'll miss a lot of things, or maybe I do read it and I still miss it, or I don't understand it. But that one does get me quite a bit. Oh, and object permanence. That would be another one I'd throw in, like out of sight, out of mind. So like buying vegetables and then totally forgetting about them unless you like put them in a very specific way. Or like I had a bucket of shirts that again, this was in moving and I like had it up high in my closet. And last summer I was like, I don't have any short sleeve shirts. This is weird. So then I bought more and then I like found the bucket of shirts. I was like, oh yeah, it was just up high. Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife does a lot of that, what you're talking about right now. Like she'll buy produce. It'll go missing. It'll go bad. I'm like, were you planning on using these cucumbers? And she's like, what cucumbers? I'm like, I guess they're going in the garbage. Like,
That's Luke to me all the time. He's like, "Were you gonna use this?" And again, it's like I bought it with good intentions, but
yeah.
then I forgot about it.
And then, I think, and you're right. I don't even want to think about the number because adding it all up, I think is almost impossible. But in reality, like it would just be mentally crippling in some ways. So I don't want to think about it in that way. But I do try to think about like, how can I circumvent this or how can I at least prevent some of this from happening? And I don't know if you have any strategies or tips or suggestions, but I haven't really found it yet.
I mean, I think it depends on like what the like figuring out what the driver is. So if it's impulsivity, and if it's like impulse shopping, there's going to be different practices for that. If it's out of sight, out of mind, then it's like, how do I create visual systems? So I've seen a lot of great systems for like bridges, especially for ADHDers, being aware of like, okay, out of sight, out of mind. Or I mean, there's a lot of ways to make a more visual system. Like I know I don't use it personally, but I've heard great things from Timo. It's an app that creates like a visual schedule. So you could put visual reminders on there. If it's the inattentiveness, I think being aware, I think partly it's the more we make these mistakes, we're more aware of like, okay, this is the thing I need to check next time I do this. So like, you're probably not going to make the mistake of a 4 a.m. booking in Greece anymore. I'm probably not going to forget to make sure I have 2 tickets, one for me and my child next time I book an airplane ticket for a trip. Like, so there's the learning that happens, which is just painful. But I think knowing what our vulnerability is and then building systems around that is one of the main. So like it starts with self insight of like what's the thing that makes me vulnerable here.
Yeah, for sure. For me, with the impulsivity piece, it's about like slowing myself down when I get overly excited
Hmm.
about something and want to like dive into it and really being mindful of like how am I navigating what I'm about to pursue or how I'm about to implement this.
For sure. Like the power of pause, the power of a pause. And then I love and this I love nonviolent communication theory. This is not it's kind of indirect, but like cuz they do such a good job of anchoring language and needs. But I just love that approach for everything of like, okay, pause. What is it I'm needing here? So if like I'm about to make an impulsive purchase or buy 50 pounds of flour, if I can figure out like what is it I'm actually needing here or going after, and if I can identify that need, that can help me through that moment.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion because you're right. In the moment, it feels like the best decision in the world. Like, of course, I'm going to use all this flour. And then in reality, you're like, this hobby doesn't even really interest me anymore. So we're moving on from this very quickly. What do I do with all this flour? Do I throw it out? Do I give it away? Like, there's so many things that happen after the fact.
Exactly. Exactly. The future self test, like I often will like kind of talk to my future self or like think about like, okay, how is my future self going to feel about present self decision? That doesn't mean future self always wins. I think present self for me still wins most of the time. But even just having that dialogue in my head of like, is future self really going to be excited about this? Um, or again, am I romantifying?
Yeah.
And is it because I'm maybe trying to escape an uncomfortable feeling right now, or because I'm like what's going on here?
Yeah. The romantification piece is huge. So trying to do that check and balance internally to like pump the brakes a little bit and be like, all right, future self, like, what are we looking to get out of this? What are we seeking? And I think that's a good strategy to try really hard to incorporate. I like to have like post-it notes or like reminders all over the place. I need those things in order to keep track of most of my life. So I might start incorporating like the future self one too as a reminder about decision making in a lot of my day to day.
Hmm. Yeah, that'd be a good post-it. How does future Patrick feel about this decision?
What does future Patrick feel about saying yes to this opportunity? Yeah,
Hmm.
I think that's a good one. And I think it's just a good reminder to just like check in with yourself too and get a sense of why am I saying yes to this? What's the driving force? What's the motivation? Um, I guess if they all feel like green check boxes, then it feels like okay to pursue. And if there's some red or some yellow, maybe tread cautiously or like approach trepidatiously.
And also, like, if the decision can wait, that's something I'm practicing, is let me not make this decision right now. Let me sit on it for 24 hours. I've also heard that as a practice for ADHDers with especially if impulse shopping is something of like, put it in the cart, come back tomorrow, like, do you feel the same about it? So have everything in your cart, like, sit for 24 hours. Um, oh, one of the most speaking of, like, identifying what the underlying need is, one of the most helpful things that I thought about this because we talked about the Goldilocks sensory last episode. Um, I realize a lot of the time it is like I'm stimulus seeking. And so, okay, what I need, or I'm tired and I'm trying to like pull out of my tiredness. And so a lot of the time what I need is like, okay, maybe what I really need is a nap. Or maybe I need some stimulating music and to like move my body. But identifying when I'm seeking stimulus because I'm understimulated, like intellectually, or that creates so much agitation. That has been such a helpful framework because for most of my life, I didn't have this lens of like I'm understimulated and I'm just looking for something to stimulate my mind.
Yeah, that's really well said. I think that is such a motivating factor for me. So being able to have that insight into what am I seeking? Am I understimulated? Am I overstimulated? I love that. I really like the idea of like the 24-hour pause. I think that's really great because if you come back to it in 24 hours and it no longer creates the same excitement or stimulation, is it going to create that excitement for you 6 months down the road? Probably not. Um, Good way to delete something out of your cart too when we're
Mhm.
impulse shopping.
Yeah. Well, and this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, but I think this also gets into like ADHD friendly business practices. So I don't know if you've ever used this. I was back when I was learning like early email marketing. You know, a lot of the marketing stuff that, like, you learn in the business stuff, like, a lot of it I never even tried because I was just internally had a cringe response. But I
Yeah.
went to this training about, like, tripwires after someone signs up for your email, and I was like, "That's a cool idea, I'll try that." And I set one up, and I actually forgot about it, which I had thought I had taken it down, but I hadn't until someone emailed me, and I'm so glad they did, because it was basically you sign up, you get a free PDF of one of my workbooks. It was the Spoon Theory workbook, and then you get offered the workbook at 50% off. That was the tripwire of, like, that trips because it, like that trips that activates the receiving that.
Mhm.
Um, and someone emailed me and they were like, you know, this isn't an ADHD friendly business practice. And I was mortified because first of all, like as soon as I did it, it felt cringy. But it was one of those things I had forgotten I kept up. But that's something I'm thinking a lot more about as someone who does make my living selling products. I don't want to create a sense of urgency. I don't want to create a sense of immediacy.
Yeah.
That's not like that's taking advantage of the ADHD system. But so much, if you're at all in like digital space, it's like have timers, like, this is a sale and it's gonna go away in 24 hours, like, or like sales funnel, like, there's funnels people buy that have timers attached to it,
Yeah.
um, or the tripwires, or that, like, they bank on urgency to sell things, and we know from psychology that makes people buy things is creating a sense of urgency, but it's not ADHD friendly. So it's like, what do you do as a business owner? Do you do the, like, here's best practices in marketing or here's ADHD friendly. So that I I'm embarrassed by some of I and a lot of it I never tried because a lot of it was
Yeah.
cringy from the start. But some of the stuff I've tried, I'm like, I'm embarrassed about that. And I wouldn't do that now.
Yeah, I'm glad you named that. I think that that makes so much sense. And I think about that a lot when I'm doing like retreat launches, because so much of that unfortunately hinges on that urgency because other people are signing up simultaneously. And I don't like the feeling of like Black Friday sailing almost, of like, look at this thing, it's going live in 2 days and there's only X amount of spots. I don't like creating that pressure because I think it often leads to buyer's remorse or significant ADHD tax, where someone commits to something because it feels really exciting, but then quickly realizes, I can't afford this. Like, I can't afford getting myself into this situation. And that doesn't feel good as a business owner, to then have to like stick to a policy because of deadlines, or you're getting closer to dates for things, especially because I deal with a lot of vendors, hotels, like, some of that stuff unfortunately gets set in stone. And I don't feel good about having conversations when someone maybe made that purchase impulsively, but really, it's not a good decision for them for whatever reason, financially, emotionally, whatever the case may be. And that doesn't feel good for me as the business owner on that side of things either.
Yeah. You're almost like, instead of like all the flashy sales thing, what if there was like a pause sign on the sale, like the checkout page, like pause. Is this really going to benefit your life? How will you feel about this How will you feel about this purchase 24 hours from now?
Right.
Um, it'd I love it because I mean, it'd be so counterintuitive business wise. A lot of my business marketing is counterintuitive. Like I do the opposite of what people say you should do. Um, but I also find that like so many of in the neurodivergent community see right through that marketing stuff, that
Yep.
like I also think that's how you authentically connect with your people. Like I think a lot of us don't like feeling like we're being manipulated. Sometimes the urgency is real though. Like in your retreats, it's like you can't have
Right.
100 people retreat. In my community, I open up 20 seats a month, and and it's like I can't expand on that. So sometimes the urgency is real, but then I think there's definitely ways of like how that's messaged that's either more friendly or just more honest. Of like, yeah, it's limited. People typically sign up. So like, yeah, but it's still, it's
It's a
tricky.
tricky balance, but I think if you're doing some of this intentionally with the desire to build relationships and to put out quality content and to put out quality resources, you can navigate a lot of the like, do this now, buy this now. If you don't act now, you're going to miss out. Like, you can really eliminate a lot of the quote unquote like suggested business practices that don't work well for a lot of neurodivergent humans. Cause like you said, seeing
Mhm.
right through a lot of the sales tactics, and it just doesn't feel good on either side. I always feel, I don't want to feel like a used car salesperson when I'm doing something that I'm
Yeah.
passionate about.
It doesn't feel good. Or like the one that I hear the most is like, find people's pain points and talk about their pain point and how you're going to take them on a transformation journey.
Right.
I don't want to be centering ADHD and autistic people's pain points. Like,
Sure.
um, that's not that interesting to me. Like, and also like, I don't want to guarantee like, do this thing and in 90 days you will like, like, I don't know. I can't get behind that kind of marketing messaging.
Agreed. 100%. Same page.
Um, well, I guess it feels divergent, but it kind of makes sense that we went from like ADHD tax to ADHD friendly business practices because, and I think that actually I think is a helpful thing to be aware of as an ADHDer is a lot of the marketing tactics out there. Like this is what is taught of like
Yep.
you want to create a sense of urgency. The other marketing tactic is you want to create FOMO. You want to create romantification. Buy this perfume and you're going to look like a goddess. Buy this thing and your life's going to be organized. And so knowing that like, okay, these are like psychological principles that, businesses have learned and that they are purposefully using and I'm more vulnerable to. I think just that awareness in and of itself can help us with the pause of like, okay, there's a strategy behind their marketing right now. Um,
Absolutely.
and my brain's really like more vulnerable to getting pulled into that.
Oh, that's a great point. I mean, billions of dollars get pumped into marketing, and billions of dollars get pumped into marketing with an understanding of psychology. So
Mhm.
I think it's important to acknowledge that, like when you're seeing something, it's being created and sold in a specific way for a reason. And like you said, FOMO, the fear of missing out, this bright, shiny new object, whatever it is, that's all done for a reason. It's the same thing with casinos, putting slot machines at the exits and entrance ways of casinos where it's loud, it's flashy, there's lights, people are winning, people are pulling the lever over and over again. Like that stuff is organizationally done very strategically and psychologically to create a response. So really just acknowledging that and creating that pause factor when you're maybe purchasing something or getting really excited about something too.
And then it can feel like a win when it's like, "Ah, I didn't fall for you." Like, "I see what you're trying to do, and I didn't fall for it."
Exactly.
I don't know if you ever watched Mad Men, but I loved that show for many reasons, but, like, I really liked when they'd come together and they'd talk about like, Don Draper is the main character, is like, what do you want the person to long for and feel when they see this advertisement? What's the, like, human longing that you're wanting to tap into? Um, and I think having that lens of like, "Okay, what longing are they trying to pull from me? Um, and can I sidestep it and then feel, like, proud of myself for that?"
I like that. That's a good way to look at it for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Are we at the point?
I think we're at the point. I also, just being honest, just saw our contractor pull into our driveway, so I know what's about to happen in my house. Um, so I don't want to cause chaos while people are listening to us speaking, which is like dogs barking, people knocking on the door. But I do think that a lot of these reframes and strategies are helpful, and hell, I'm going to start using some of them myself. So hope this conversation was helpful for everyone else listening too. And I always look at you and then you nod. And I'm like, oh, shit.
Like, I have nothing to add. If I try to add anything, I'll ruin it. Just keep going.
New episodes of Divergent Conversations are out on Fridays on all major platforms and YouTube. Like, download, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you next week. Bye.